You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Thank you for joining us today. What's going on here? My PDF thing froze. That's not good. So welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. We're here again. We're going to read another paper today. I want to thank any and all of you who are here listening to me live. I do realize that there's some of you who do listen religiously on the playback. You can't make the live sessions. I want to thank you guys too for being here. Man, my computer chooses right now to act funny. Before I go further, I want to remind you guys that this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. I would invite you guys to tune into the other shows here on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you guys check out those other shows on KWAZ Radio, especially now with my my short hiatus that's coming up. I'm still uncertain as to when I will be back from the hiatus. I'm uncertain as to if I'll do some pre-recorded shows and premiere them. We'll see how the time works out. But I plan to definitely be on the Discord hardcore. If you're not on our Discord server, click the link in the description of this episode, as well as at the top of the chat. Click the link and join the Discord. As I'm talking to you guys, you might be able to tell I'm trying to get this. I'm trying to get this PDF screen to come up, and it just won't come up. I hate when I have a show about to start, or I've started a show and here comes some technical difficulty because it's only me manning the switches, right? While I continue trying to troubleshoot this, let me just say on the Discord, last week we had a great episode of Shoot the Breeze, and after the Shoot the Breeze, I partook in for an hour. I partook in a conversation afterwards. Great conversation. Revolutionary Matron, who's in chat room right now, saying greetings to Revolutionary Matron. She was in that chat. Kevin Carre 42, who's usually here, he was there as well. And we also had Simba Bryant in the chat. And I think those guys went on to continue talking to like 3 in the morning. So I assume it was a great conversation had by all who was there. But there's something to share here, and there's something to be shown. A sister on the Discord, Nefere, and I had a conversation months ago. And she was telling me about this guy she had spoken to online and this plan that he had and how great the plan was. And she wanted to share it with me but she first had to ask him his permission, to share the plan with me. And we kind of, didn't follow up with the conversation. As it turns out, the person who had the plan was Simba Bryant, who was in the chat room last time for Shoot the Breeze, who partook in an after show discussion on the Discord, and he shared his library with me, which is extensive. In fact, the paper tonight comes from his library, and he shared his plan. And lo and behold, like I said, it was him who the sister was telling me about months before, right? Oh, I see what happened. My Adobe updated, and now it wants me to restart the whole computer, and I'm not going to do that. So let me see what I could do alternatively. Let me see something. So the reason why I tell that story is to say that once you continue doing work, even though it might not seem like folks are partaking in it or paying attention to it, the work rewards itself, and like minds will find each other. And I just want to get that across to you guys tonight, that you should always be looking to do work. The work at some point will reward itself. I was thinking about the podcast network recently. And the reason why, if you have something to say, you should be joining us to say it, is because you might look at some of these episodes from the Pro-Black perspective, from my show, from the Harsh Reality Podcast. You might look at some of the numbers on YouTube and say to yourself, oh my goodness, and say to yourself, those numbers aren't really doing much, are they? But understand that being interconnected the way we are, understand that 100 years from now, right, whatever YouTube evolves into next, just like you can find old videos of Dr. John Henrik Clarke and Amos Wilson and Kwame Ture, etc., you'll be able to find these episodes of the show. And a whole new generation of people will be interested in the work that we did 100 years prior. So you always do the work. Like I said on the Discord this week, those of you in the Discord know what I'm talking about. You always got to be doing something, right? You always need to be doing something. Anytime you greet another African, how are you? How have you been? What have you been up to? You should always have something that you can talk about. Some work that you're doing, some research, what have you. You always should have something that you could talk about. And I asked folks in the Discord who's down with that. And a number of you responded and said, yeah. A lot of you put down what your interests are, what work you're doing. And that's what we need to be doing as a people. I'd like that to be the thing that we do in the Discord all the time. And I'll also like it to be the thing that we as Africans do all the time. When we greet one another, we should be talking about ideas and actual work that we're doing. Not just ideas, but the actual work that we're also undertaking at the same time, right? You should be able to tell I'm filibustering because I can't get this PDF thing to open because of the update to Adobe. So my screen is going to be stuck there, but I found a way to open it in this paper in a browser, and I'm going to read the paper from the browser. So the screen doesn't move, Don't worry about it. I'm reading the paper. You're getting the knowledge from the paper, right? But I want y'all guys to keep that stuff in mind. Always do work. Always be about something, right? And in particular, be about Black somethings, right? Your work, you should always have some project that you're doing, something that you're thinking about, something that if you share with others, other people might jump on and say, hey, I'd like to help with that. Or you might hear something someone says and say, hey, I'm not doing anything right now. Maybe I could help with that. Right? So always be about doing something. 100 years from now, if we can still learn some teachings from Kemet, imagine what folks 100 or 200 years from now can learn from us. So always be about doing the work. So let's get into the paper. Unfortunately, you guys won't be able to read along with me, but you'll still get the knowledge all the same. This paper is really called Toward a Black Radical Independent Education. Black Radicalism, Independence, and the Supplementary School Movement. You guys know I'm always talking about curriculum. And we need to build this African-centered and ultimately a Pan-African-centered curriculum. And you always hear me mention and acknowledge the fact that if you think everyone is going to be able to stay home and homeschool their children, that's a pipe dream. The reality is some of us won't be able to do it. Some of us will be able to do it to uncover others. The reality is, at the very least, we need to have a supplementary school education, supplementary school curriculum, right? We need to be teaching our children to counter any nonsense that they're getting in the public food system. You come home and you learn something, you learn the real knowledge. And let your kids be going into these schools and just laughing to themselves, looking at the fuckery going on in those schools, right? But you have a home, you're home with your children for a certain amount of time. You're supposed to spend that time giving them this supplementary education. We could work on that. We can build that. Join the Discord and help us, right? So this paper is from it's along those lines. It's by Kehinde Andrews. I think I've read a paper by Kehinde Andrews before. The abstract says Black radicalism believes in the centrality of racism to Western imperialism and a diasporic commitment to the liberation of Africa, existing in distinction to Black nationalism, Marxism, and critical race theory. A Black radical critique of schooling is presented, and the mischaracterizations of Black radicalism as segregationist and separatist are examined. Black independent education is a necessary feature of Black radicalism, and the Black Supplementary Schools Movement in Britain exists as a potential space where such an education can be developed. So you see where the foci of this paper is, but that doesn't mean that you cannot learn from the movement. The keywords here are Black radicalism, supplementary schools, racism, segregation. There's a quote here from Malcolm X that I like a lot. All right. This word separation has been misused. A better word than separation is independence. That's by Malcolm X in a book from 1970. Right? This word separation has been misused. A better word than separation is independence. Ultimately, that's what we're fighting for. Our independence to be us, to govern ourselves, to have self-determination, to have power, right? So the introduction of this paper says Black radicalism takes a position that mainstream institutions in the West work to oppress people of African ancestry across the globe. Examples such as Black Power, Pan-Africanism, and Rastafarianism all view Western society as being structurally racist and promote the creation of independent Black organizations, institutions, and nations as the only solution to overcoming racial inequality in society. The first section of this article will briefly define Black radicalism, distinguishing the tradition from Black nationalism, Black Marxism, and critical race theory, or CRT. This reclamation of black radicalism is necessary as the tradition has been in decline and has a distinctive perspective on how to overcome racial oppression rooted in the Pan-African diasporic project. A black radical critique of schooling will also be outlined, which sees the system as inherently racist, necessitating black independent spaces of education. Black radicalism has been mischaracterized as encouraging both segregation and separateness, and therefore criticized for increasing social conflict. The second section will address these liberal critiques and outlines the call for a black independent education, which is central to a black radical analysis. There's a history in both the United States and Britain of black groups setting up extra schooling to serve the needs of the community. In the United States, the Black Panther Party implemented liberation schools to engage children in revolutionary education that was not possible in the mainstream. In Britain, the radical nature of the Panthers has not been as overtly present, but there is history of organized resistance to racism, which has involved supplementary schooling dating back to the Black education movement, given prominence by John LaRose in the 1960s. It is the contention of this treatise that the long history of spaces of black-led education provides fragments of what a truly black radical independent education would involve, with the treatment of the supplementary school movement presented being indicative. Right? Hold on a second. Okay. Right? For black radicalism, it is essential to build an education in the West that can allow for success of the black population in mainstream society while radically connecting black communities into diasporic politics, which can liberate the African continent. This article lays the foundation for a comprehensive vision of black radical independent education, which is vital for future work. The history of the black supplementary school movement in Britain offers potentially radical and subversive spaces from which to build such an education. All right. Again, if you join the Discord, you can get involved in this kind of work. Right. And we are actually looking for folks from all over the diaspora to join the Discord. So that brings us to a section of the paper called Black Radicalism. Right. Black radical thought is often linked and reduced to the Black Power movement that occurred in the U.S. However, the specific Black Power movement in the United States was one of a number of black political movements across the African diaspora that called for and attempted to bring down the system of white imperialism from the end of the 19th century. Perhaps the first example of black radical politics linking across the diaspora is Ethiopianism, which arose in 1895 with the battle for Ethiopian independence from European powers. Across the world, black people identified with the struggle and saw Ethiopia's victory as their own. The politics of black radicalism can be seen in the work of such activists and politicians as Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, Malcolm X, and others across the diaspora. These varied movements are connected by their radical take on society that highlights Western imperialism as a central feature to be overturned, and a commitment to the African diaspora that would unite and work as a driving force for liberation. Black radical politics and actions are a continuation of the struggles against Europeans in Africa during enslavement and also earlier conflicts with Arab invaders into Africa. Black radicalism must be understood as the politics of revolution, seeking to overturn the system of Western imperialism that oppresses the black population worldwide. Brings us to a section called Radicalism is not nationalism, Marxism, nor critical race theory. By the way, if you listen to the show today, I want you guys to hit the like button. And I want you guys, I want all of us to normalize sharing the show on social media. Right? Let's normalize sharing the show, not just mine, but any show and every show on KWAZ Radio. Let's normalize sharing the content of KWAZ Radio, period. Right? And let's all work to making it bigger. We need black media We need serious black media that unites, not divides, right? I would like you guys to make sure that we get that done. So again, this section is called Radicalism. It's not nationalism, Marxism, nor CRT, or critical race theory. The positions that argues black people need to organize collectively to battle racial oppression has been commonly referred to as black nationalism. Black nationalism draws its name from the concept of black as a country, where black people as a group constitute a black nation. Black nationalism has been used to describe radical politics of a black diaspora. For example, Garvey consistently referred to the black nation of Africans at home and abroad. However, black nationalism has developed its own sensibilities that identify it as separate, although related to black radicalism, as previously outlined. A primary issue is how the black nation has often been viewed within black nationalism in the United States as being a nation of black Americans that needed to separate from white America, but remain in the geographic location. The Nation of Islam, the NOI, is perhaps the most notorious black nationalist organization, and their plea for independence and unity is clear and addressed solely to the black population of America. The NOI appealed to the government for a separate portion of land where they can start the black nation, and is evident in the call to black Americans from Elijah Muhammad. Right? There's a quote here. Come and let us unite under the crescent and do something for ourselves in the way of supporting our own needs. Go after some of this earth for our nation of 22 million here in North America. That's Muhammad in 1965. You guys know how I feel about Muhammad and that. Right, and the NOI, right? And by the way, we had a real good conversation about that in in the after show from the Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze on the Discord, right? To continue, central to black radicalism is the connection to the diaspora. And although there may be similarities in lineages, narrow nationalist calls for independence fall outside of the wider black radical movement. Black radicalism constructs black people as a nation that transcends national boundaries, connecting back to Africa, and does not seek to separate black people of a particular nation into a residential grouping. Right? Does not seek to separate black people of a particular nation into a residential grouping. The black nationalism invoked by those such as Malcolm X and the Black Panthers are part of a global strategy to overthrow Western imperialism. Calls for the development of a black nation within a nation, Du Bois, right, do not involve the revolutionary analysis or the politics of black radicalism. This is how you get to the heart of a matter, by the way, right? I mean, think about that. A black nation within a white nation? Come on now. Right? And you know, it's not to say that you can't, you know, how do I put this without sounding just ridiculous? It's not to say that you can't do something for yourselves where you are, right? But ultimately, you gotta make Africa a superpower. And so, whatever you do, wherever you are, the idea is that the power backing of a continent, right? You will be covered, so to speak, right? Right? Like KW Don 7 just said in the chat, unless you're willing to fight a war, a separate sovereign territory within the North American boundaries is a pipe dream. And that's something folks got to understand, that Nothing happens overnight. You're not gonna get our folks out of this place, out of this region overnight. Folks are gonna want to try to make themselves comfortable in the meantime, and I understand, I get it, right? But you gotta be prepared that you're gonna be at war. We just had the 100th anniversary of the massacre of Black Wall Street, right? Those folks had land. Those folks had a neighborhood, a community. Those folks lacked the ability to war with their enemy around them. And you just gotta be realistic about it. Life for Nelly says good evening. Good evening, Life for Nelly. Daily affirmation by Pauline is here saying good evening. All right. To continue. When exploring the Black radical tradition, it is also necessary to make a distinction between Black radicalism and Black people engaged in radical movements. It is particularly the case when dealing with Marxism, where there is a long tradition of Black adoption and involvement. Marxism is a revolutionary politics. However, it is based on a class analysis of global capitalism and does not view racism as the fundamental organizing principle of the West. I told you all before, I grew up around folks who believed wholeheartedly in Black socialism, all that stuff, and that's really not our shit. That's because you put Black on it doesn't make it ours. The Black radical tradition is organized around the diaspora connection of people of African ancestry, and the economic determination of Marxism led to some Black scholars turning away from the movement. The point is not to argue that the Black radical tradition outlined in this article is the correct perspective for Black people to endorse, but to explain how that there is a distinction between Black radicalism on the one hand and Marxism embraced by Black people seeking radical alternatives on the other. Black radicalism has been in decline over recent decades in the United States, suffering from the same assault from the state on the Black Panthers, which ultimately led to the demise of the movement. In the African context, Black radicalism was also attacked in the form of Western intervention against Pan-African leaders such as Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. Academia has picked on strands of the Black radical analysis, which places racism at the core of Western society. Critical race theory, CRT, is perhaps the best example with this Bell's stock message on racism and advancement in society that, quote, what we designate as racial progress is not a solution to that problem. It is a regeneration of the problem in a particularly perverse form, end of quote. CRT presents a clear conceptualization of the permanence of racism in Western society. However, this led Bell to conclude that there is nothing that can be done to end racism, leaving the Black population in the position of having to understand, quote, both the recognition of the futility of action and the unalterable conviction that something must be done, that action must be taken. Well, I want to read that one more time. I think it's important. I think it's important because I think it's something that Black folks, even conscious Black folks here in the States, here in the West, I should say, in particular, the States, have to understand. We both recognize, it's both the recognition of the futility of action here, in brackets for me, and the unalterable conviction that something must be done, that action must be taken. And a lot of us are in that space. We know that something must be done. We know that some action must be taken. But at the same time, we recognize the futility of the action in this space. to be a lifelong fighter, like many of our esteemed ancestors were in the West, is almost a shame. The beauty of it, though, that I take from it is that you have to do it. Even though it might be futile for the folks here, ultimately, it will be the work that you do, as I said at the top of the show when I was filibustering. Ultimately, the work that you do today can be the seed of inspiration tomorrow, 10 years from now, 100. Right? Listen, a lot of us are where we are in our understanding because what Garvey did 100 years ago. So ultimately, it doesn't have to be futile, right? Ultimately, it doesn't have to be futile. But the work has to be directed and driven towards the idea that if you stay here, you're going to be a loser here. You can build here as much as it's allowed, so to speak, but ultimately it's going to be futile. You have to be building with the mindset of, and there's nothing wrong with it to a certain extent, you have to be building to the mindset, I'm going to take these tools, this knowledge of building, so when I hit the continent, I'm a builder. I'm not trying to figure it out. Right? KW7 says in the chat, Urugu fought the Civil War to keep the United States of America together. What do you think they will do with blacks trying to secede and annex a few states in the South? Revolutionary Matron said, we are standing for the mind of humanity. We got enough bleeding hearts. Right? Again, let me apologize for the fact that the screen is standing still. It's if you were here at the very beginning of the show, you know that my Adobe updated, apparently. I didn't know this. And so for me to access that screen after the update, I'll have to restart my whole computer. I wasn't doing that, when the show already started. So I'm reading this PDF in a browser right now. So that's why the screen is standing still. I hope you guys can still enjoy the paper as it is. What CRT presents then is a claim stating that the truth of oppression loudly and firmly is put forward as the best solution possible to the problem. For Bell, quote, we legitimate it, meaning racism, if we can pinpoint it, end of quote. The role of CRT then becomes that of leading chorus of rebellion against racial oppression and ultimately making the best out of the situation as possible. And that's where a lot of black folks are. Trying to make the best out of the situation as possible. But is that sustainable? Is that what you want for your folks, our folks, long term? No. To continue, this is a simplification of a complex position. However, for the purpose of the present article, it is enough to illustrate that CRT does not embrace a revolutionary and therefore radical politics in response to endemic racism. Having drawn clear lines of demarcation around black radicalism, it remains very difficult in terms of analysis to discuss the position without making reference to work that is black nationalist or black Marxist, since these are the dominant frames through which black collective organizations are seen through, and CRT has produced valuable scholarship on the racist nature of society. Black nationalism has become a system of meaning through which black collectivity is seen devoid of an analysis of global politics of revolution. The Black Panthers remain the beacon for the politics of black rebellion due to their impact on the popular imaginary, I think they mean imagery, and the wealth of writing that has come out of the movement. Yeah, I think they meant imagery, right? But they said imaginary in the paper. right? In terms of Black collective organization and an analysis of racism, these perspectives do connect with the Black radical tradition, and therefore are necessary to articulate a Black radical perspective of mainstream society. However, the focus of the current article is on outlining the position of Black radicalism on education, which will be detailed, understands mainstream school systems to be endemically and unalterably racist, necessitating Black radical independent education. This brings us to a section called the schools work to make things work. The schools work to make things work. Right? Central to liberal portrayals of education is that the system is meant to be equal and that it will improve as it progresses. For Black radicalism, this liberal understanding is a myth, and the reproduction of racial inequality in schooling is seen as a fundamental part of the functioning of the school system. The perpetuation of racism in schooling has been most extensively explored in the discussion of the quote-unquote hidden curriculum on both sides of Atlantic. Carter explained that American schools reflect the middle-class white habitus of the dominant group in society, and as such put Black pupils at a disadvantage. In the case of African American school pupils, Carter argued that the non-dominant cultural capital the young Black pupils need for life in their own communities is antithetical to the dominant cultural capital that is necessary for success in the schools. Ladson Billings in 1995 talked of the need to code switch, which means to have knowledge of both the dominant and non-dominant cultural capital of the schools and the community, respectively, and using them accordingly. It's not difficult to see how these ideas may also apply in the British context behind the backdrop of disproportionate exclusion rates and low expectations of Britain's teachers. Code switching and non-dominant cultural capitals are welcome ideas because they diagnose a structural problem within the schools and provide a solution that does not denigrate Black cultural forms. To some extent, code switching cedes that the dominant cultural capital of the school is legitimate. I agree with that. We brag about code switching and don't understand what it is we're really bragging about, right? Or at least it does not challenge the dominance of a particular habitus. By accepting that there are arenas where people have to behave, talk, and dress differently, some Black students are still put at a distinct disadvantage because success in schools require extra skills other than those who are at home in the dominant cultural sphere. This creates a two-ness, reminiscent of Du Bois's double consciousness, right? An image of the Black student and citizen being pulled in competing directions by virtue of their Blackness. Right? In the chat room, KW Don 7 says the only way you could annex a portion of America is if it collapsed and fell into anarchy, and to accomplish this, you would have to be thoroughly organized, which we are not currently. I agree with that. Right? I agree with that. America would have to burn to the ground and rebuild, and you would have to be, extremely organized. You would have to be powerful to be able to cut out parts of America and make it your own. The system is fortified here, is the point that KW Dawn is making and myself. The system here is fortified, right? A lot of Black folks do understand that kind of innately. It's fortified here. And so a lot of Black folks are just hoping to make the best of it while they're here, without recognizing that we have other places. We have a place, a homeland, right? A motherland. That if we could make that the power base, we will be good as people. To continue, Black radicalism recognizes the necessity to code switch as an inevitable strategy given the present conditions. However, it is not taken as the overriding solution, which is a school system that does not privilege the dominant and where Black students are not prejudged for their presentational styles. Furthermore, the code switching position also places too much emphasis on the cultural and tends to essentialize Black students by virtue of particular cultural forms. It's very difficult to talk about the generic Black student. To focus on culture tends to make the problem of the school system a particular one for the Black poor. It is the, quote, ghetto children who do not succeed, and it is they who need to learn the appropriate cultural codes for success. Within this argument, it is presumably accepted that the Black middle-class student with better access and knowledge of dominant cultural capital is above and outside of the discussion about the schools failing Black pupils. However, it is inappropriate to exclude the Black students in higher economic positions because they continue to suffer educational disadvantage in relation to other students from similar socioeconomic backgrounds. In other words, your class isn't going to save you. Your class hierarchy is not going to save you. Even though you have some access, right? It's not going to save you. What will save you, though, is a curriculum that, and these are my words here, that reconnects you, immerses you in your cultural, in your African tradition, right? Your African traditional culture, and in your Black equals African community. That's what it is, right? And this way, your caste or your class divisions won't even matter, right? A radical critique of education also goes further to challenge the cultural codes of mainstream schooling with the knowledge that is reproduced. Freire, in 1985, argued that the knowledge in the school system is produced by the elite and therefore fused with dominant values. Consequently, Black radicalism questions the values of the school system and instruction. Light is shown not simply on whether the cultural bias in the schools is keeping Black students from equally achieving successful grades, but onto whether the knowledge itself is appropriate for any Black pupil, no matter how well heeled. The entire substance and basis of mainstream schooling is challenged, as Dove in 1993 argued, quote, anyone aspiring to and believing in the same European-centered cultural value system will determine and devalue the potential for Africans to appropriate African self-worth and self-development as a basis for self-determination. Right? Anyone aspiring to and believing in the same European-centered cultural value system will undermine and devalue the potential for Africans to appreciate African self-worth and self-development as a basis for self-determination. Mainstream schooling, then, not only filters disproportionate numbers of Black people into the bottom rungs of society, but also works to condition all students into Eurocentric understanding that reproduce an iniquitous and racist society. There's no success to be found in equal levels of achievement in this position. What is warranted is an entirely different approach to schooling, where the necessary education for the uplift of the Black community can be achieved. Therefore, from this position, the only solution to the problem of schooling is a reconceptualization of education devised and controlled by Black communities. This is the essence of the call for a Black independent education. This brings us to a section of paper called Black Independent Education and Supplementary Schools, which is really what we're here for, right? We're here for that. And so right after this quick station ID, I'll read some comments from the chat room and I'll get into this very important section of the paper.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Check out those shows as well as the Queen's Council podcast, and follow KWAZ Radio on YouTube. Very important. I say that every time, and I'm only seeing like 2 people actually go and subscribe and click the bell. We really have some stuff coming down the pipe. And also, if you want to help make some things happen at KWAZ Radio, we could do with some volunteer work. I put that out there on social media earlier, and KWAZ Radio also posted a status on Twitter about volunteers in different black communities across the U.S. and throughout the diaspora. If you want to be a voluntary reporter for your community, hit up KWAZ Radio. We need more people reporting on what's going on in their neck of the woods. Right now, we have stuff going on in Nigeria. And it'll be nice to have a couple of folks out in Nigeria reporting, right, to us, right, just dropping a voice note and reporting what's going on. What happened today in Nigeria, for example? It's important to us in the diaspora. What happened today to black folks in the UK? What happened today to black folks in, various parts of Canada, the Caribbean, right? So if you're interested in volunteering, and dropping a voice note, every day or what have you on what's going on in your neck of the woods, identify your neck of the woods. What's it like there for black folks? What's new? What's good? What's bad? Right? This is how we create a black media that keeps everyone up to date. This is how it begins. But it takes some folks to volunteer their time. That's how it starts. You got to give your time, and that's how we get things rolling. Okay? So if you're interested, answer that call. Hit up KWAZ Radio on Twitter. Email them at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. And, volunteer your time. Right? In the chat room. Revolutionary Matron says the whole game is to make black people think that they too can ascend to whiteness. This hope holds us back. Similarly, the hope to one day be at the top of the economic chain keeps people enslaved. Absolutely. Well stated. A&O is here. A&O says, yes, it is all mind games. Speaking of these mind games, did y'all ever see that clip where Yvette Carnell from ADOS fame said that what they want to be is white? Did y'all ever see that? And that goes along with the other clown from ADOS, Tone Talks, who sat up on a radio station and was like, well, we're actually more, we're actually more culturally European than African. We like the same foods and shit. That's the kind of whole shit we see around folks who really aren't radical. Right? Folks who just want to get along with white folks. Folks who want to ultimately become it. Who want to ascend to whiteness, as Revolutionary Matron just stated. And that's the nonsense we have out here. And unfortunately, those are the voices that people listen to. Those are the voices that people follow. Right? We got to change that. We have to become, and I'm talking each and every one of us on this live stream right now, we have to become the voices of change. We have to become the sensible ones, right? And that idea that KWAZ Radio has about the voluntary reporters is a real good idea, right? It's a real good idea. We need black folks who are on the ground in these different places where black folks are, who can tell us what's good and what's bad that's going on. I'm talking about all over the diaspora, to keep us informed and up to date. If you can help with that, make sure to reach out to them. I gave you the email address. I told you the Twitter. Reach out to them and go ahead and help. Right? To continue with this good part of the paper, we're halfway through the paper. Black independent education and supplementary schools. Separateness to independence. Black radicalism calls for the collective organization of black people, and therefore often talks of the need to have separate organizations from white society. For black liberal leaders, this call for independence has been seen as problematic since, quote, the black man needs the white man and the white man needs the black man, right? If I'm not mistaken, isn't that a King quote? If I'm not mistaken, that may be an MLK quote, right? And desegregation was, of course, one of the primary aims and success of the American Civil Rights Movement. This rejection of separateness can be seen in the British context by British Prime Minister David Cameron, viewing multiculturalism as a, quote, wrong-headed doctrine, end of quote, that has led to communities living, quote unquote, separate lives. Such separateness is said to breed mistrust and hatred between ethnic minority groups and the majority population. In the field of education, one can see this idea at work in Britain with the schemes that bus young Muslim, I guess both young Muslim and white children, that bus young Muslim and white children into each other's schools. Black radicalism has always been opposed to the idea of segregation. As Malcolm X explained, segregation is that which is forced upon inferiors by superiors. So you have to understand what they're saying here, right? Understand what they're saying here, because I know it hits you for a second. Black radicalism has always been opposed to the idea of segregation. As Malcolm X in 1963 explained, quote, segregation is that which is forced upon inferiors by superiors. The Negro schools in the Negro community are controlled by whites. The economy of the Negro community is controlled by whites. And since the Negro community is controlled or regulated by outsiders, it is a segregated community. So understand what Brother Malcolm was saying here. Understand what the idea of segregation or the opposition to segregation means. Segregation is something that is done to people in order to control and exploit them. The situation in schools in the United States where black students find themselves segregated into poor schooling and lower ability levels is an example of segregation. When Malcolm X called for separation, he was arguing that the racial makeup of the school population was the problem, but that the schools were not controlled by black people for the benefit of the black community. This is why we got to separate from these folks. It is also important to highlight the difference between the call for separation in black radicalism and those of far-right racist ideologies. The key distinction is that within black radicalism, there is no inherent hatred for any group. When those like Malcolm X excoriate whites, this is not because of their ontological position of being white, but rather because of what Western society has done as white people. This is in stark contrast to racist belief and ideologies that black people are biologically inferior. There's no advocating of separation for reasons of racial purity as seen in apartheid, but because of feelings of superiority and difference to whites. In fact, as Malcolm X argued, quote, this word separation has been misused. A better word than separation is independence, end of quote. Black radicalism sees separateness as a tool for the black communities to gain control of their own resources, and therefore the real issue is of independence. In terms of education, this involves the institution of a black independent education, which can meet the needs of uplifting black communities. A comprehensive black independent education does not exist at present. However, there exist models that are instructive in helping to outline a definition. In the United States, one of the main programs of the Black Panther Party was to set up what they call liberation schools. Huggins and LeBlanc Ernest in 2009 explained how the goal was not only to improve the standards of literacy, but to provide a political education from a perspective that would allow the pupils to think outside of the constraints of the mainstream. In the case of the Black Panthers, this was a revolutionary education to engage black people in class struggle. The criticisms of such a political stance on education are obvious, since what the Panthers deem education can easily be constructed as indoctrination. However, the implicit argument of the Panthers is that the school system is indoctrinating young people into following Western ideals and maintaining the status quo. The political education that they prescribe is no less political than the liberal mainstream version, which hides behind objectivity and universality, while privileging and promoting the subjective and particular. A radical critique of schooling does not see any knowledge created as free from the political values of those who produced it. Right? In the chat room, KW7 says, she said she wanted to be normal and that it is normal to be white in America. Talking about Yvette Carnell now. So he's expanding upon what I said. I basically paraphrased it, but KW Dawn has given us a little bit more. So let's see what KW 7 is saying. She said she wanted to be normal and that it is normal to be white in America. Well, when I put those two thoughts together, that's how I paraphrased it. She also said that we should drop the RBG flag and embrace the red, white, and blue. And this is who our, African American brethren are listening to now, right? KW Dawn says that's the equivalent of a Uish dropping the Star of David and embracing the swastika. She actually got on Beyonce for incorporating the RBG colors into the U.S. flag, right? That's who our people in the States, a great number of, are listening to. That's what they're listening to. Thanks for that expansion on what I paraphrased earlier, KW7. I appreciate that. Right? Essentially, she's saying you want to be white and you want to embrace the flag, the same flag that oppressed our people, that plays a role in oppression of our people around the globe right now. Where was I? Yes. Black Panther liberation schools were based on a Marxist understanding and therefore would differ from schools built on the principles of black radicalism. The Panther schools were radical as they taught and prepared students for the Marxist revolution. Black radicalism accepts racism as a permanent feature of Western society, therefore necessitating revolution. However, the liberation of Africa and the creation of a truly Pan-African Union is the solution to this problem for black radicalism. All right? Right here, that sentiment that they just stated, that's a Garvey and an Nkrumah sentiment. Right? Black radicalism accepts racism is just what it is. It's a permanent feature of Western society. And because of that permanent feature, you have to have a revolution. But the liberation of Africa And the creation of a truly Pan-African Union is the solution to this problem. That's the revolution. Therefore, the role in the West for the black population is not to cause a revolutionary overthrow, but to organize and prepare to assist in the eventual Pan-African revolution. Black radical independent schools will not solely be black in terms of students and teachers, but will present a critical pedagogy based on an understanding of a black radical positionality and truly transform teaching and understanding. This is one of those authors I can support. And you know, a thought hit me recently. You know, it's something I've been doing a little bit kind of, you know, somewhat wrong in reading these papers is I need to reach out to more of these authors, the good ones, right? And this author might be one of the first ones. I mean, I have reached out to Molefi, right? Of course, didn't hear back from the brother, but I think I need to start sending them these discussions when I have good authors, if they're still alive, send them these discussions and ask them to appear on the show and expand upon it some more, right? You guys tell me if you think that's a good move in the near future. So this brings us to a section called Academic Attainment versus Black Education. And this should be a good section because in my mind, a lot of times when people talk about independent black schools, it's about academic attainment. It's ultimately about being able to achieve some paper that you can hang up on your wall that says, hey, I went through the same steps as our enemies. Versus in my mind, a black education is one where we solve our problems. We are educated in problem solving. We're educated on how to think. We're educated in our history to know how others dealt with issues and to be able to learn how to empower ourselves in that way, right? Let's read the section and see what they're talking about. In the chat room, KW Don 7 says the FBA ADOS are fizzled out right now. They reached their peak when they had their conferences. Jason Black just does weekly podcasts complaining about what Biden isn't doing for them. Okay, you know, that's interesting. I thought maybe ADOS had fizzled. I thought FBA was kind of going strong. I also am very cautionary about ignoring groups. See, I remember when ADOS and FBA first started, and I was on that in the beginning. But other similar folks to me brush it off as saying, it won't last and this, that, and the other. But it still persists. I don't know if it still has the impact that it once had, say, a year or two ago, prior to the election. But that sentiment persists, and it's an ugly little sentiment that goes on now, because you'll have folks online who are anti-Caribbean, anti-African, but you got to deal with these folks in the real world. And quietly, there's a resentment going on. And I keep my eye on that stuff a little bit. And from what I see on social media, it's still strong. I don't know if it ever had full strength in the real world. But that's something we should keep our eyes on. But I appreciate KW Don 7's point or opinion on that. So it brings us to that section, academic attainment versus black education. Black people in Britain have created black-led spaces of education, which are embodied in the Black Supplementary School Movement. What makes these projects distinctive from other ethnic minority extra schooling is that they do not focus on language or religion but rather on teaching the basics of schooling to overcome inequalities in education and providing education about Black history and culture that is absent from mainstream curriculum. Within Black supplementary schooling, there are differing ideologies and purposes of the programs, which explicate the split between efforts to supplement mainstream schools and those that try to represent an alternative form of Black education. It is this separation that one can begin to define what a Black radical independent education would entail. So let's hear this. Due to the inequalities in the education system, a focus on the fundamentals of schooling, mathematics and English, has been at the center of the movement. As Stone in 1981 explained, quote, acquiring basic educational skills was the basis of what went on in supplemental schools. End of quote. Stone highlighted the difference in supplementary school projects by drawing a distinction between official and self-help projects. Official projects are those that are state-funded and can afford qualified teachers with some form of payment, while self-help programs are those that fund and rely on themselves. There's been a tension around this split and the balance between promoting success in schools and developing a more culturally and historically based learning. For Stone, left-wing teachers have done more harm to Black children in the self-help projects by focusing more attention on the teaching of Black history and culture than on the basics of mathematics and English necessary for the school system. Lacking from Stone's focus on supporting the school curriculum is the distinction between academic attainment and acquiring skills for success in mainstream schooling. From a radical perspective, learning English skills in particular is a language skill as much as it is as much as it's an educational one. Gordon in 1998 argued that students do not learn to read and write, they read and write to learn. By this, she means that basic skills are necessary in order to be educated. It is not the teaching of the basics that the differing perspectives disagree, but on the basis and purpose of the education that these skills should be used to learn. Official projects tend to deal in results from standardized examinations and school attainment, whereas self-help projects are concerned with developing a Black-centered education. Based on what you heard, guys, what do you lean towards more? Which one of those do you lean towards more? I just want to see something. To continue, it should also be acknowledged that even when not focusing on the mainstream curricula, the skills being developed in self-help projects could assist children in mainstream schools. An ethnography of a self-help project found that the activities around Black history involve reading, writing, and debate. Therefore, even if the aim is to get children to succeed in a mainstream school, there's no loss by focusing on Black history and culture. Innovative forms of curriculum and pedagogy are central to building educational practice that can engage and challenge pupils. It is in the self-help projects that the emergence of a Black independent education should be located, right? So at the end, they advocate more for the self-help projects, right? And there's something to take from that too, in that if you go the other way, where you're funded by whomever, remember the golden rule: the man with the goal makes the rule. So you, unless you're being funded by Pan-Africanists, African-centered people, you're gonna have a problem with those other types of schools. All right. This brings us to a section called Independence. Before I read that section, though, in the chat room, KW7 says they will have to wait until 2024 to become relevant again. FBA is not politically engaged like ADOS is. That's a good point. Excellent point. Revolutionary Matron says both groups have their anti-all other Black sentiment. We need more Pan-African voices. Black is global. We need to stop hyping people that don't want to be black as our leaders. Well said. Well said, Revolutionary Matron. KW Don 7 says Tariq's devolved into total tomfoolery, gradually easing his way into the Aboriginal movement. He is now claiming that the majority of blacks in America are, in fact, indigenous to America. So, you know, that came up during the Shoot the Breeze recently. If not last week, the week before. And my take on that was that I don't think, as the prompt alluded to, I don't think black Americans are finding that they are Native Americans that much. Here and there may have been some admixture, some mixing, right? But again, I pointed out that the Native American groups were expelling black folks left and right. And I pointed out something historical that some folks didn't even know. Native Americans, a lot of them fought to keep their black slaves. Guys like Tariq and them are dangerous dudes. And if you just brush them off, you'll be surprised to see who and what they influence down the road. Remember what I talked about this show and shows on KWAZ radio, how 100 years from now, I suspect people will be able to still tune in to some of these old shows. And we might have the ability to influence some folks. What's going to happen in 100 years when folks come back around to the ADOS and the FBA? Remember in Garvey's time, 100 years ago, a lot of black folks in America didn't want to be called Africans. They preferred to be called Negro or some shit like that. Right? We got to be careful, and we got to start being the counter to these guys. This is why we got to support independent black media, and you know me already. I'm saying support KWAZ radio, help it grow, help it get more voices on the network. Let's make it a Pan-African thing. Let's get more people from different parts of the diaspora, right, speaking on connected black issues so that we could drown out the nonsense from some of these loudmouths that we have going on out here. Revolutionary Matron said these people are looking for an identity. Black is not covered by anything. These people are seeking profit and gain for themselves. And that is the failing, I gotta say it, of the continent. And it's a failing so far of the Pan-Africanists. The Pan-Africanists haven't indulged themselves enough, and the continent hasn't done enough to get some of that, to get some of these powers up off of them, right? Instead, they've retreaded what the colonizers laid down, right? You got to do better so that when black folks hear black, they're proud about it. That is not just rhetoric. Black is beautiful, I'm black and I'm proud and all that old shit, right? Black is power. Let's get some power going here. So when folks hear black, they're proud to be black. Right now, what's happening? Everyone thinks everyone else is better. So black folks are clinging to whatever identity that they think they could get close to, that they think is better. Tariq and them used to be Moors at one time, right? Because they think that made them better, not realizing that blacks held a, I think KW Dawn 7 pointed out one time, and a brother on the Discord, Naka, on the Discord, who's in Spain, you guys saw him post what he's about, right? When he and I had a conversation, you know, he was pointing out to me like the black Africans who were a part of the Moors, they you know, most of them was called like Abid or Abidi or something that the Arabs today still call black folks. The Spaniards in Spain still call black folks today, like they were like second-class citizens within the Moors, according to what he was telling me, right? We gotta make black really something that's powerful. So black folks won't be so easy to try to embrace everything else but black. To continue with the paper, we had this point in the paper called Independence. State funding has been a central issue in the supplementary school movement, as program leaders have been wary about the prospect of being co-opted by the authorities. Again, the golden rule. The man with the gold makes the rules. There has been a desire throughout the movement to, quote, maintain autonomy from the state, end of quote, in order to keep control over the practice of the programs. Being born out of a community response to a need created by the inadequacies of the school system, this should come as no surprise. As Best in 1990 explained, there is a caution that if programs are receiving money from the state, then those programs will have to avoid criticizing the funding agents. Supplementary schools, by their very existence, criticize mainstream schools, and there has been a concern raised over the years to make sure that the state should not interfere with their practice. However, from the days of direct conflict with the local authorities, there has developed a much more open relationship with the state. Official projects have to an extent been co-opted by local education authorities to supplement the work of mainstream schools. In some cases, in order to access funding, supplementary schools have had to become, quote unquote, accredited by bodies that examine their management, teaching, and curriculum to ensure they are appropriate. What do you think appropriate means? Rejecting state funds allows the self-help projects to develop in an arena where they teach what is missing from the school curriculum, in addition to helping students survive mainstream schooling to achieve success. The fundamental point is that black radical independent education is not simply based on the students and teachers being black. The official projects rely on the quote-unquote fraternity of color. However, they do not qualify as independent education because they simply supplement what happens in the mainstream. Self-help projects can have an independent curriculum, and innovative forms of curriculum and pedagogy are central to building educational practice that can engage and challenge pupils. Drawing on volunteers from within the community, often parents, also embeds the self-help program into the concerns and functioning of the locality. It is not being argued that self-help black supplementary schools offer a perfect model of black radical independent education. There is an important debate on what constitutes black education within self-help programs. A focus on a cultural and historical teaching of history could simply reinscribe the idea discussed earlier that black children need black education to solve a psychological crisis and will then be able to succeed in school and society. The black radical independent education based around a radical critique of schooling necessitates a much more fundamental reformulation of education. However, within the self-help projects, there are fragments of the ideas and practices from which a potential black radical independent education could emerge. Self-help projects contain the key ingredients to explicating what such a black independent education could entail: being black controlled, having a black curriculum, and being entrenched within local communities. So if you are leaning towards the self-help education, you're leaning in the right direction. But is it all? Is it the end all to the situation? Right? I would argue that it's not. There's a little bit more that needs to be added to it, right? In the chat room, KW7 says Tariq is also claiming that the majority of the slaves were taken to the islands in South America. I think I read this before. Okay. So this brings us to the conclusion of the paper. Education is a key battlefront in the fight to transform the conditions facing black people in a British society and connecting to the problems in the diaspora. Racism is embedded in the structure of a school system that consistently reproduces racial inequality for the black population of Britain. Black radicalism argues that it is necessary to create spaces of black radical independent education where mainstream ideologies can be challenged and black students can be equipped with the education to succeed in society. A fundamental criticism of black independent institutions from a liberal perspective is the fear of separateness. However, black radicalism does not call for separateness in the vein of apartheid, but rather for the independent control of institutions in black communities. Black supplementary schools have existed in Britain for more than 40 years and present, quote, both radical and subversive, end of quote, space that to some extent lies outside the provision of the mainstream school system. The history of black supplementary schools has been ideological cleavages with the more official projects dedicated to augmenting mainstream schooling. There exists, however, a more radical tradition that attempts to overcome the hidden curriculum and provide a more overtly political education aimed at not only school success, but also a radical critique of society. It is beyond the scope of the present study to outline precisely what and how to achieve black radical independent education. But future work needs to build on the foundations laid by the supplementary school movement. I agree with that. There are numerous other politics and perspectives on both the problem and solution to racism. However, black radicalism represents an important tradition which aims to ultimately overthrow a system of Western imperialism that globally oppresses black populations. An important starting point for this political agenda in the West is a black-controlled education with a black radical curriculum rooted within localities that can work for the uplift of black communities. You know, one thing the paper, that's the end of the paper, by the way. And again, if you want a paper like this, if this paper resonates well with you and you want it, hit me up on the Discord. I'll gladly give it to you. Right? One of the things that is important, right, is that education puts your people to work. It allows them to be builders. And it's important that whatever education, black radical education that we're devising, it's also important that we keep in mind that we want the learners to learn the things that puts them to work in black society, that puts them to work in solving problems and nation building, right? So when we devise this curriculum, one of the things you have to keep in mind is what's important, right? Like someone said in the last broadcast, and we always talk about this, Africans need to technologize, right? You gotta teach African learners, black learners, right? How to technologize, how to nation build, or what it takes, what are the jobs within nation building, right? And so that's something that we got to keep in mind with this African-centered curriculum. On the Discord, Daily Affirmations by Pauline finished her, I guess, first draft of the first story prompt, and she promptly began working on the second prompt. I'm not quite finished with my first story, but I would like you guys to work on your stories and let me know when you're done with your story prompts. I have I think, a very good idea when it comes to these story prompts. I'll release the idea. So when you finish your stories, don't share them with the rest of us. Hold on to it. After we've done about 10 of these story prompts, I have I think, a very neat idea that I think everyone will, especially after you've done 10 different short story prompts, I think people will like this idea. So hold your stories close to the vest. Don't share them with anyone. Keep them to yourselves. At the end of 10 story prompts, I'll let you know what the final prompt is. And again, I think you're gonna like it, right? So just let us know when you're done with your story prompts, right? So if you're done with the first one, let us know. So that would also keep other people engaged to finish their stories. Okay? Just do that for me. Also, Sister Nefere suggested to me at some point recently that we should add a category on the Discord that deals with like personal development. And that builds upon what I said yesterday about, and what Onita say from the pro-black perspective recently said about doing black work. And it also builds off of Revolutionary Matron bringing up the 501c number 8 idea. I'm going to add a category. Since I'm going on this little hiatus, I'm going to add a category about professional and personal development. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet. You guys can give me some ideas. And one of the channels under that category is going to be this 501c number 8 thing. Revolutionary Matron has agreed to do a lot of the research, but when it comes to financials, we're going to need people who are immersed in finance and business and stuff like that to hop on and be of assistance to her in those things. So look for that to happen. Also, I'm going to put this out here now. I don't know when I'm going to implement it, but we have a lot of folks on the Discord who are not participant in much of anything. Revolutionary Matron is my mic was talking to myself there for a second. Thanks to KW Don 7 for letting me know. But what I was saying at the end here was I hope I finished the paper before that sound cut out. But what I was saying is that during the hiatus, more work will be done on the Discord. I want people to be a little bit more participant on the Discord. Did you guys hear me talk about the writing prompts and all that stuff? Let me know. Did you hear me talking about the writing prompts and whatnot on the Discord just now? I want to get an idea of how much was missed in what I was saying. What's the last thing you guys heard me say? Anybody? Seems like no one's hearing me still. What's the last thing you guys heard me say before I go? Okay, so you guys heard about the story prompts. Save them until we get about 10 solid story prompts. I'll give you an update on what to do for the 11th. I'm telling you, it's going to be good. And if you follow through with it, there's a reward for all of us at the end of it. Trust me. Yes, the last thing I said was there's not a lot of people active on the Discord. Revolutionary Matron is pretty new, and she's been very active. I'd like more activity. I like more activity on the Discord because we have a lot of work to do, and we have people who have great ideas. The problem is we don't have more than 2 hands. Thanks KW7 for telling me I can be heard. Revolutionary Matron, thank you as well. Right? We need more hands on deck. That 501c8 idea that Revolutionary Matron has, she has volunteered to kind of spearhead that. She's going to need more hands, not just hands in terms of people hanging around talking about it, but people who have expertise. And we need to help provide folks with expertise. By the way, one of the things I like you guys to do for me is invite one other person who you think is like-minded, who you think will get down with the work. Invite one other person as soon as you can. Let's get more participation on the Discord. It might be the case where, you know, folks who are on the Discord, and it's not any of you in the chat room right now, but there's some folks on the Discord. I don't know what they're about. I haven't seen them since they've landed on the Discord. I don't know what they do. I don't know if they're spies. I don't know if they're agents. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to start trimming the fat a little bit. Again, not you guys here. You guys are the solid folks on the program. I know you guys to be solid people, but there's some folks in the Discord. I don't know what they're doing there, etc. So you might see where there's a trimming of the fat going on, but you guys keep the faith in the meantime. Do the work, do the black work that needs to be done. I'll be back talking to you guys on live stream soon enough. I'll be in the Discord. I'll be available any day, anytime. Just hit me up. I'm talking to Simba Brian about presenting that framework that he put together. That's just neat, real nice. I'll try to have him present it on the Discord. I'll let you guys know when that's happening. We established a Friday night films and Friday night discussions. We'll try to get that going. All right. Until next time, guys, y'all be good. All right. I'll see you on the other side. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.